Hey everybody, in this video we're going to talk about converting the standard form quadratic equation to the vertex form quadratic equation. This is a little trick that sometimes you're asked to do, so it's a way that you can look at this and kind of think about how do we get from the standard form to the vertex form. And the vertex form is we get there through completing the square. And what we're going to do is we're going to complete the square, but we're just going to keep everything on one side of the equation instead of two sides of the equation. So if you're not familiar with completing the square, go back and check out my other video where we talk about completing the square, and that might help out with this a little bit. So when we complete the square, what we do is we look at these first two terms and we think, what do we have to do to make this thing a perfect square trinomial? Well, we have to take this -2 and we divide it by 2 and we square it. If we add that to these values, which is a value of 1, if we add that 1 to the x squared minus 2x plus 1, now we have a perfect square trinomial of x minus 1 squared. So if we added 1 here to the equation, a brand new 1, we have to make sure that we subtract 1 from it as well. So normally you would add 1 to both sides of the equation, but since we're only working on one side of the equation, you have to add the value and subtract it at the same time on that one side, that one side of the equation. So at this point now we could just factor our perfect square trinomial, and we could get our x minus 1 squared, simplify the 3 minus 1, and we get 2. And we have this thing converted to vertex form. Now another way that you could look at this is that you could say, well, this 1, you can get this value from the 3. So you don't really need to add and subtract 1. You could just rewrite this whole equation as plus 1 plus 2. So just basically splitting apart that 3 into two parts, where you've got 3 is now the plus 1 plus 2. You throw your parentheses in there, and now we're right back to the same place that we were before, and we can simplify from there. So whichever makes more sense for you. Sometimes though you're not going to have a value that's greater than the amount that you're looking for. Like 3 is greater than the 1 that we would have to add in there. So, and it doesn't always work, but as you get comfortable with this, you could do that. So like for instance, if we had to add 7 and we only had 3 on there in our equation like we do in the first equation here, then that wouldn't work. But you know, it's just something to consider if you're trying to move through these things quickly. It might save you like half a step there. Okay, so for the green equation, we're again going to look at these first two terms, and we're going to try and split this -5 and 2 into two pieces and then square it. So divide it by 2 and square it. So we've got -5 squared, -5 over 2 squared, which is going to be 25 over 4. So that's what we need to add and subtract to both sides of this, or to this equation at the same time. So we're going to add 25 over 4, so we're going to subtract 25 over 4. So the rest just comes down with it. Throw our parentheses in here and start simplifying. So we know our perfect square trinomial, it's going to be it's going to be basically the square root of that 25 over 4. So we can subtract 5 over 2 and then square that. It's always that piece inside the parentheses. That's what the extra part is when you're completing the square here, inside the parentheses there. So then we have to convert our 1 to 4 over 4, and we have to subtract our 25 over 4, so that gives us a 21 over 4. Right, actually, that's not right. This should be minus, shouldn't it? Because we subtracted, so that should be a minus in there. Okay. So, so that's our perfect square trinomial for this one, right? All right. So now let's look at, or not a perfect square trinomial, our vertex form. So let's look at the orange example. The orange is a little bit more complicated because we have this 2 in front of here. So in order to complete the square, we have to factor out that 2 from this piece that we focus on. So to do that, first we'll just pull out that 2 and we'll rewrite the rest of the equation we add up our 3. And so basically we've just factored out a 2 from those first two pieces. We left the 3 on its own. Now we need to look at our negative 4, divide it by 2, and square it. So we get, what's that, negative 4 divided by 2 squared is 4. So we're going to add that in to inside the parentheses. But now let's think about as we are adding this outside the parentheses. This 4 that we added inside is actually multiplied by 2. So the 4 when we put it in here is actually 8, right? Because when we put a 4 inside the parentheses there, that's saying that in our order of operations we have to multiply by 2 to get the true value of that. So if we're adding 8 in there, we have to subtract 8 on the outside of the parentheses. This is a tricky thing. This is where a lot of people get tripped up with this. So make sure you're considering that if you're adding it inside the parentheses. So then we can just simplify 2 times x minus 2 squared, and then simplify the 3 and negative 8, and we get our negative 5. All right, one last one. Now let's pull in a negative and have some fractions here. So we're still going to look at this negative 2. We're going to factor that out of our negative 2x minus 5x. So we're going to start with negative 2x squared plus 5 over 2x, right? So if we take that negative 2 and we multiplied it by 5 over 2, the 2's would cancel out, the positive would become negative. We're right where we started. All right, so we can do a quick check there. And then we, of course, we have plus 3 on the outside. All right, so now, how do we cut this 5 over 2 in half? Well, that's the same as multiplying it by 1/2. Dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2. So we get 5 over 4. So we're going to take 5 over 4 squared, and that's 25 over 16, and that's going to go inside our parentheses. So we put that inside there. Now, remember, this was multiplied by negative 2. So even though we're going to add our, we've got our 25 over 16 there, we need to multiply this by negative 2. So 25 over 16 times negative 2 over 1, we can do a little simplifying here, and we get negative 25 over 8. So actually inside the parentheses is not a 25 over 16, a positive 25 over 16. That's actually negative 25 over 8. So what we're adding to that 3 is going to be a positive 25 over 8. Again, you've got to check these things to make sure that you are adding and subtracting the full and proper amount. Okay, so let's do some simplifying. We can simplify our parentheses to 5 over 4, x plus 5 over 4 squared. Now we have to get this 3 and the 25 over 8 added together. All right, so we've got to take 3 over 1 and multiply that by 8 over 8. So we get 24 over 8. Add that to 25 over 8. And what do we get? That is 49 over 8. So that's going to be what's added on the outside of this. And we have our solution written in Vertex form. So hopefully this gave you a few different examples that you can look at to help you with any of the types of problems that you might see like this. And I hope that helps. Yeah, I'll talk to you in the next video.